Welcome back to Media 7. Last year we reported on a wave of sustainability stories, all suggesting ways in which you personally could help save the planet. This year those stories have largely been replaced with advice on how to survive the recession. The green message has disappeared at the highest levels too. Here's a look at the score. Green! It's so last year. Vanity Fair has cancelled its annual green issue. The environment and global warming have slumped as priorities for cash-strapped Americans. And New Zealand turns out to have led the world in the bold contention that modern light bulbs are the harbingers of the nanny state.
If people wish to buy incandescent light bulbs, then this government will not stop them doing so.
The new government's excision of sustainability from energy policy has been and gone in the media.
Thermal energy generation is essential to keeping the lights on.
Reported not on any technical merit it might or might not possess, but simply as part of the political game.
Key's message is reasonably clever. He's effectively saying he'll do what it takes to keep the lights on. And amongst voters, that pragmatism might just be popular.
Meanwhile, President Obama's fiscal stimulus bill contains an unprecedented $87 billion for green initiatives.
We will double the production of alternative energy in the next 3 years.
Nearly all G20 nations have included green packages in their response to the financial crisis. Global Pulse rounded up reports from Korea and Turkey. Yes, they stopped whining about using wind turbines and started building them for export. Japan kicked in green dollars for its car makers. In Germany, the government is targeting solar power technology. And in Abu Dhabi, they're building the no-car, carbon-zero city of the future.
The project aims to become the world's waste-free, car-free city powered entirely by renewable energy.
Meanwhile, in New Zealand, this is now the website for the government's sustainability policy. We might even be good at this stuff, but with rare exceptions, it's a debate that we're basically not having. Joining us to have the debate about the debate are retiring Green Party leader Jeanette Fitzsimons, Good magazine publisher Vincent Heringer, and Richard Simpson, former Auckland City Councillor and entrepreneur, would be fair to say. Welcome to you all. Jeanette, there appear to be, judging by that clip, things happening everywhere else that aren't happening here. Why?
Well, the fundamental truth that other countries seem to have latched onto and New Zealand is extremely slow to get is that the environment is the foundation of the economy. That in fact environmental issues had a large part to do with the economic crash, particularly the high price of oil, but also climate change, lack of fresh water supplies, rises in grain prices because of land and water and oil. It all hangs together. And as I often say to business people who understand this language, the economy is a wholly owned subsidiary of the environment. If the parent company crashes, the subsidiary crashes too.
But haven't you now, just this week, gone and given the government a free pass by entering an agreement with them? You've given them cover, haven't you?
We actually haven't given the National Party anything in this agreement.
They haven't given you anything either, really, have they?
Oh, you wait and see the size of the home insulation scheme when it comes out, and the energy efficiency initiatives that we are working on, and quite a few other projects as well. We're not giving them confidence in supply. They are not our preferred government, but they are the government. They have confidence in supply anyway, and our policy as Greens is that we will work to make the country better for Kiwis, and if that involves working with National, who want a home insulation program, and making that bigger and better, who want some energy efficiency, and using our expertise to show them how to do it, then
but you know there are a lot of your initiatives under the last term of government that have been stripped out by National already.
Yes, that's right. In the first couple of weeks before Christmas, they went about cancelling many of the things that I'd worked on for the last 3 years, and that really hurt. But hey, there is the possibility under this agreement of getting some of that back once they start to understand what the purpose of it was. I think it was a very hasty political decision after the election, and they may well regret it.
Well, I admire your optimism, but I must say I was going through the Hansard of Jerry Brownlee's questions about CFL light bulbs last year, and it was so tendentiously crackpot that I really, it still puzzles me that he was allowed to get away with this. It must frustrate you. It's a light bulb standard, for goodness sake.
Well, that's exactly it. Nobody was banning incandescent light bulbs. Some of the incandescent light bulbs are efficient enough to meet the new standards. There's a whole bunch of different kinds of bulbs that meet the new standard. And the other thing is that we have this Trans-Tasman agreement with Australia, whereby we've been working in lockstep on energy efficiency standards, because that agreement says anything that can be sold here can also be sold in Australia and vice versa. And so I would expect the Australians to be kicking up a bit of a fuss about New Zealand pulling out of the deal when it comes to lights and televisions, and saying, well, hang on, are you in this agreement or are you not?
And I bet you'll say, I told you so.
Oh, I try not to say that, Russell. I be saying it too often. It's just not what people want to hear.
Yeah. Now, Vincent, you publish a magazine, very good magazine, whose intentions appear to be somewhat unfashionable this year. Is that the case? Is that a problem?
No, I don't. I've never claimed to be unfashionable, Russell. But I don't think that the government is actually in step with the rest of the country. And I think if you look at actually those, just to talk about politics for a minute, if you look at those party votes, ACT Party, which does seem to have its hands on the lever of government, was only squeaking in at, can't remember the numbers, but it was at 3.5, barely.
3 point something,
yeah.
Yes.
So what we find, and we're at the coalface selling advertising, writing stories about, the real economy, not with due respect what happens in Wellington, and we're finding that that we're experiencing a recession, not a downturn in sustainability, and so while the recession might be, say, having somewhere between 15 and 30% effect on, say, advertising revenue, that's affecting sustainability just as much as it's affecting anything else, cars, cosmetics, or whatever. So the downturn is a recession. It's not an anti-sustainability, and within that, then there are some sub-stories to tell about. Actually, sustainability is holding up quite well by comparison in some categories, and I'll give you a couple of examples. The Crowd HRV that have Mark Ellis selling systems in their houses. I mean, they're going gangbusters, and it's not so much that it's green, but it's kind of logical. It saves you money.
And interestingly, they're not marketing it as green. They're marketing it as, here's Mark Ellis, you'll like this.
Yeah, and
so is there something in that?
There's absolutely something in that, and with apologies to Jeanette, there is a lot of common sense behaviour that people don't want to label as green, but they just say it saves us money, it makes us warmer, it increases the health of our kids and our family. Jeanette would probably call it good green practice, but who cares what you call it if in fact it has a positive effect on the environment and on your health. So those guys are doing well, and then running a magazine, you get a lot of people sending you stuff every day. I'm not kidding, we get new products coming through. Every one of them has a sustainability story, whether it's icebreaker jumpers with their what's called barcode, new cosmetics coming from the wicked Johnson & Johnsons even, are all coming into this area. So I don't buy that there's a downturn in sustainability. I think there's a recession, absolutely, and there are parts within that of the sustainability economy that are absolutely booming. And we talk about gardening in a minute. Gardening magazines are going gangbusters because people realise, geez, I better grow some carrots. If we're going to be starving, at least we can grow what we can turn this lawn into something to eat. So I don't agree that sustainability is out of fashion. In fact, there's parts of it that are doing just fine.
Now, Richard, I think Vincent raises an interesting point here, that there are different ways of selling these ideas based around sustainability. I mean, actually, for example, I talked to someone who was marketing hybrid cars. He said that men came in, you didn't want to talk to them about the environment, you wanted to talk to them about fuel economy. Is there something in that there are very practical ways of selling these ideas?
Oh, absolutely. You look at how New Zealand markets itself and brands itself. I mean, if it's not Middle Earth, it's going to be something seen as green, clean New Zealand or along that sort of line there. And the rest of the world looks at us as being a green nation. The truth's not quite there, and there's the whole issue when you start looking back at New Zealand that we've been a nation that's basically sold atoms to the world. We sell milk atoms, we sell kiwi fruit atoms, we sell sheep atoms, things like that. And atoms require.
And I'm
fossil
quite
fuels
glad we do at the moment, because people doing countries that did financial services are not very happy.
Yes, well, they're starting to sort of pay the bills. But the other side is that we've got to move from a nation that sells atoms to a nation that sells bits. And you start looking at sort of the type of research that gets funding and things like that. There's no funding that's necessarily going forward to the same extent as for research that relates to atoms. I'm talking atomic research, but for research that relates to bits and looking at digital infrastructures, looking at innovative delivery infrastructures for the health and for education systems, things like that. Creating in New Zealand what iTunes has created for the music industry. We've got opportunities in New Zealand to be creating industries out of for education. We're the top performing nation in the OECD that speaks English, in education, and so if we can be building these delivery infrastructures that can take these skills to the world. But at the moment, we're sort of doing work for the Ministry of Education, which leaks bits to the rest of the world, and we're out there sort of peddling these atoms that we're sort of requiring fossil fuels to take to the rest of the world. But there's a lot of opportunities there in terms of where firms are using the greening, but a lot of it is greenwashing. You go back into the newspapers with the media, you have a green page that's sitting there. It's not it's embedded with it all. And I think Jeanette was saying, you think of the environment as underpinning, your social well-being as well as the.
So you're saying it shouldn't be there in the green ghetto in the newspaper. It should be part of the news. Well, while we're on that, on the topic of greenwashing, what do we all think of Earth Day? A good or a bad thing, Jeanette?
I think it achieved almost nothing in terms of reducing greenhouse emissions, but I think it achieved a great deal in changing hearts and minds, raising public awareness, making people feel they could do something, see the wider picture. And that is, in the end, much more important. And so, I'd give a tick to Earth Hour, even though actually most of the electricity they were saving at that time was probably hydro.
And even though MediaWorks touted its support for Earth Day by driving around in a great big SUV, which I thought was the most ironic thing I've ever seen in my life.
We need to grasp the fact that it is our transport habits rather than our lighting which is the main greenhouse culprit. And transport is the single biggest thing that we need to change if we're going to reduce our emissions.
Now, I think one of the dangers with these kind of celebrity type events is they generate cynicism, because they are to often, if you were to do an analysis on them, there's probably more energy spent in publicising the event than is saved in the event, and that generates two levels of cynicism, I think, from particularly from the climate change sceptics who will use it to their advantage, but also in the general population that they. And recycling is a great example. The recycling story in New Zealand is a sham and an embarrassment, and yet we feel so good about it, don't we? Taking out our plastic bottles and separating them, and there's no substance to
You've
the
spoiled
to the
it for me
story.
now, Vincent.
I'm sorry, Russell. Being good is actually not that great. It actually, we were talking about this before, about actually when you begin to understand the reality of some of these kind of sham activities that we do, it does take a lot of the fun out of recycling.
Richard, I thought just before we move on from Earth Day, one of our bloggers, Keith Ing, made a good point. He said, forget Earth Day, stay at home with the lights on and watch the TV, but buy a CFL bulb and stick it in the roof, and you'll come out ahead in the short run. How do we? I mean, you were involved with the Earth Summit a few years ago. How do we actually move people on to these fairly simple messages about things that will actually benefit them?
Yeah, I think it's first of all winning the hearts and minds of people in a sense. I think this is where Earth Day has been good, but coming back to it, and is the issue is that a lot of these require far more structural thinking around it. It's not just about light bulbs. It's not just about sort of looking at improving the energy efficiency of a house as such. I mean, they're very important aspects there, but we've got to, as New Zealand, start looking at sort of these more broader initiatives in a far more strategic way, taking on board a lot more critical thinking by the media, but also by New Zealanders. And initiatives such as demand-side management, which we've seen these initiatives in various sort of flavours, but when you start looking at sort of where some of the countries have taken this really further forward, and coming out with legislation, but also regulation, so you're having the stick and the carrot. So obviously, replacing light bulbs, improving the performance there, but looking at sort of penalties, but also looking at things that can support people, and starting to move more and more of the way that we behave around.
Give me one practical thing.
One practical thing.
Yes.
Well, I can do that,
okay,
if you like. Waitakere City has a windmill on top of it, but if you were to do an analysis on the actual embedded energy of that windmill, it's a crock. It's a public it's a public relations exercise, and a far more practical and far more boring. I'm sorry, but sustainability actually probably is quite a boring subject. No disrespect. That the actual analysis of energy, embedded energy, and energy use it's an accounting kind of exercise, and that kind of sustainability, it can actually appeal to our friends in the National Party, because it's a job for accountants.
So what I'm hearing from all of you is that sustainability is incredibly difficult to market, and when you do, it's usually a sham. This does not fill me with hope.
That would be a
I wouldn't
cynical
agree with that.
interpretation.
I wouldn't agree with that. I think there's a lot that can be done. I mean, look at what's happening around the world now with the Green New Deal packages. I mean, the Greens have been talking ever since the election on the need for a Green New Deal. The New Deal was when Roosevelt came out and said this is a new social contract in terms of what the government and the people agree together to do. We need a Green New Deal where we say we are going to invest in the things that will deal with both climate change and the oil crisis and the economic crisis at the same time. And it's that fundamental understanding that you can do the two together and you can't do them separately. And most of the world is doing this. The United States, most of Europe, even China, Korea is a standout, Turkey, they're all investing a large part of their economic stimulus packages in a Green New Deal. The United Nations says that if we're going to come out of the economic recession, then at least a third of all the stimulus packages globally need to go into green projects. Things like the home insulation we mentioned, but things like protecting water quality with planting, things like planting up steep hillsides so you don't get floods and slips, things like planting more forests for carbon, things like building more houses. We've got 10,000 people on a waiting list for state houses at the moment. The government's building another 69, for goodness sake.
I'm going to have to stop you there,
I could go on.
Let's go out on that phrase Green New Deal, because I couldn't help but notice when I was researching the show that it's used in the media all over the world and not here, so we've said it about 10 times.
Here by the Greens.
We'll take a brief break and be back soon.